Welcome back, friends. I really do appreciate your willingness to go off and have that particular adventure. Thank you. I think what we're gonna do is go through step by step and just hear quickly from one member of the group, and you are welcome to anybody in the group volunteer, and then I'll fill in some pieces of information. But before we do that, if there's anything I really need to know right now because something went just drastically wrong, I invite you to let me know that in the chat so that I'm not charging ahead without that information. Is there a friend who would, I invite you, if you're volunteering, to just unmute yourself and start talking rather than have us look for you, and tell us who you are. Is there a friend from the scheduling and setting up the meeting who can report back in about a minute and a half or so?
Yeah, this is Alicia McBride. I in Baltimore yearly meeting, and I work for FCNL. And we talked about coordinating with the web person so that you're not conflicting. And there was thinking about how you transition, how you set up a transition from worship. You know, some meetings go right from worship into meeting for business, and whether you need to change that to give people time for breaks. And then we talked about for meetings that tend to bump up against a mealtime, whether it would be better to change so that you're having people start the meeting with all of their creature comforts taken care of so that they don't get grouchy and leave.
Alicia, thank you. This is actually, I want to start with your last point because that's one I've heard a lot of people say they've learned. Make sure that the participants have had a chance to consume food. It's actually really important. There's a reason that many of our meetings have potlucks before we have meeting for worship with a concern for business. Just a couple of other possibilities. One is to, as you're scheduling, this is your chance to pay attention to Zoom safety. So and go to the bathroom. Absolutely. Everybody go to the bathroom before the business meeting starts. So this is where you're doing things like making sure that you're not publishing the link publicly and possibly using a password. And then the other thing you can do as host is turn off the screen sharing option for everybody except the host. And these are some basic backups to help prevent, although it's not a guarantee, that thing that we have been hearing about called Zoom bombing, where somebody will come in and do something to the group, something either racial imagery or something like that, that's really, we don't want it in the group. And I want to add one other piece, which is for most of your groups, having meeting for worship with a concern for business at the same time you already would is the best move. But you don't have to. Just bear in mind that it might work better at a different time or on a different day. And as the clerk, you may have some sense of that already, or you could check with a few other folks. I like that. Grace points out that PYM released a long PDF about Zoom security today. Olivia, could that go out in an email possibly following our call?
Yes.
The link to that? Great. And I'm going to ask you to hold on to the comment about screen sharing until we get to our last half hour. And at that point, I will definitely welcome it. Screen sharing, I don't know the answer to the specific question about co-hosts and screen sharing. I think all I can say is to explore the options because I honestly don't know. Is there a friend who would jump in and tell us what you came up with about the agenda? Tell us who you are and what your group talked about.
This is Bill Cousins from Germantown Monthly Meeting. And we discussed the preparation of the agenda and what you do with it. Basically, the three of us who spoke in some detail talked about how we basically followed the procedure that we had done in our physical meetings for worship in terms of soliciting items for the agenda from committee clerks, relying if the meeting has a schedule of presentations that are done at certain months of the year, incorporating that or confirming with the physical clerk or worship and ministry, whoever the clerk is that is scheduled to make a report that month, that they still want to be on the agenda. And Bruce made a very good point that given that an online meeting may take longer, you want to prioritize the items that are going to need discussion and threshing early in the agenda, so you're not finding yourself very compressed for time at the end of business meeting to try to squeeze those things in. I talked about how the fact that my first meeting for business this past Sunday, we did have to defer 2 items, but I had structured the agenda as Bruce had suggested, so that the ones that we had to defer were ones that were not time sensitive, but more were just reports from those committees. I'll stop there, but be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Bill. I think a couple of pieces I might add. One is I want to really affirm what you said about follow the normal procedure. That's a big deal for me. Lean into normal. People are already feeling shaken up and like this is different and weird. So the more that you can do in the normal way, the better it is. I really believe that. A couple of just little things. One is that I have found that if you send the agenda to people as a PDF, more of them are able to open it. When I send an agenda out by Word, there's always somebody who doesn't have the right edition of Microsoft Word to open it. And I make an exception there for my recording clerk. I always send it to the recording clerk in Word so that they can easily copy, paste, and edit. And the one other piece that feels more important to me virtually than in person is to have an agenda where the questions are very carefully defined. So for each item of business, I try really hard to provide a little bit of background information, factual information, and then a very defined question. And I even put the question in a different color. And I do that to help people keep their focus because there can be a lot of distractions at home. And also the factual information piece is something that I do for the sake of someone who might be on the phone and who might not be hearing everything that we're saying exactly word for word. It also helps for the sake of people whose internet connections might be clicking in and out. How about the preparing yourself group? Preparing yourself as clerk. I have no idea who you were, so somebody unmute and jump in if you're willing. I see Chris's mouth is moving, but he's not unmuted. There you go.
Hi, that worked a little better.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about preparation. A lot of it would be similar from my perspective, going over the agenda, reading the reports ahead of time, just having a sense of what you're dealing with. One of the things that would be difficult, I think, would be the technical aspect of it, coordinating with whoever it is who's running the meeting or able to mute or unmute or all that technical stuff. You really can't do that until you're actually there at the meeting. And it is, that's just, I don't know how you prepare for that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, all right.
The technical question of that is so good. There are many friends who, if they're going to be doing a virtual clerking session, want to have somebody else doing the tech. And there are others for whom it is more natural to do the tech themselves. Please do it the way that feels righter to you. If you think you're capable of doing the tech and that feels right, then by all means do it. Alicia McBride says that her meeting did a test session before the actual business meeting with just a few people. Yeah, a couple of you are recommending that. And absolutely, that is something that works, is to have that test meeting so you can give it a try. Ask for help, yes. One of the things you can do is sort of ask around within the meeting, who is it who knows the tech well? Robin points out that that might come from young friends. And in Philadelphia, I think the phrase young friends means teenagers. I know it does in New England. And that is true. And it's also the case that sometimes it won't come from your younger friends. Sometimes it will come from the 55-year-old person who happens to be a professor and has been on Zoom for 8 hours a day for the last 3 weeks. And so ask around and see who's the person. And if there's nobody in your meeting who knows the tech and you really need help, I'm guessing you can probably email Olivia and say who can help. She's nodding like that might be a possible thing. Or FGC, you can email Robin Josephs if you are trying to figure out how to make this happen. I like too what Barb Stevens is saying. Make sure that your associate clerk, your assistant clerk, your clerk in training is ready to take over if your internet access disappears along the way. And I'm glad you brought up internet access again, because I want to say that it's a good thing as clerk if you have any question about your internet connection. If you're somebody that you know it might drop out, try connecting by video and by phone so that you have the phone connection if your video drops out. If you do that, you have to mute the microphone on the computer and you have to turn off the sound on the computer. If you don't do both of those things, very bad feedback yuckiness will happen. But if you have that backup phone connection, then you have surety that you're not gonna disappear. Just a couple of additional things for preparing as clerk. Make sure that you're plugged in, check your lighting so that you can be seen, and possibly find yourself an elder. And the last thing, this is a matter of personal preference. Some friends like to have reports and attachments up on their screen, so it's parallel with the Zoom videos. But some people prefer to print them out so you've got them hard copy in front of you. Think about which one of those is more your thing. I'm a very techie person, but I always have the notebook next to me with notes on it. I'm always doing both. Yes, somebody needs to make the speech about how to use the tech. And we're gonna get to that in a second. So thank you, Doreen. Speaking of speeches about technology, where is our first 5 minutes group? Somebody from the first 5 minutes group.
So this is Debbie Hollingshead from Pittsburgh. We sort of like our first impression thought was, well, nothing really, you just sit there and wait for everybody to come in. But then a couple of ideas that came up were to have a document, a shared screen document that says something about what to expect. Possibly you might with the security issues, you might want to have a waiting room set up, and then you would be having to monitor, either the clerk or whoever the technical host is would have to be monitoring and making sure that people came in, you know, appropriately. I feel like there was another idea and I didn't take notes, so I don't remember it. So if anybody else does, maybe they'll jump in.
Thank you, Debbie. That was great. A lot of it is just you sit and you wait for people to join in. I love the idea of having a share screen thing with the technical information and what's about to happen, as long as you're also reading that out loud to make sure that people who are phone only are having the same information. Somebody that folks can call on the phone if they're having tech issues. Yes, I have been the tech support person for some things, and one of the first things I do is give everybody my phone number and my email address. So if they're in trouble, they can call me, text me, or email me. Obviously, as clerk, you do not want that to be you, but to have somebody on that call who can do that is a really helpful thing. The last thing I want to add is this is less so if you have a large group. So if there's more than 20 of you, you probably don't want to do this. But if there are fewer than 20 of you, as clerk, you can give a personal hello to each person as they come on and make sure that you hear their hello back. The reason that matters is because then you know their sound is working. I don't usually tell people that's a sound check, but that's what it is. Designated greeter to welcome each person if you have a manageable number of people, and making sure that the meeting is set up so no one can enter before the host and everyone enters on mute. I think that's more important if you have a large group, but that's definitely something to be thinking about. Opening worship. We have somebody from our opening worship group.
I'll be the spokesman, I guess.
Thank you.
We thought it takes a little while to settle virtually than it does physically. And we would just start the introduction and then wait until we kind of have a sense that virtually people have kind of come into the silence for a while. But it does take a little longer, we thought.
Thank you. I hadn't actually thought about length of time, and you may very well be right that giving it a little longer is important. One thing that I do when I'm doing worship online like that is I tell friends we're about to go into worship. If someone new joins us during worship, I am going to greet them so that they know their technology is working, and then we will simply continue in worship. And as clerk, what I do is I say, welcome, Joan, we are in worship. And a couple minutes later when Marion pops up, welcome, Marion, we are in worship. And friends immediately know they're there, they're welcomed, it's working, and they should not start talking and asking whether their microphone works. The other thing that is just a side note is that many friends are discovering in this time that verbal prayer seems to be becoming more common among unprogrammed friends, and that in this sort of setting, that can be comforting and grounding. So just test whether that feels like something you might explicitly invite. It's a possibility. Is there a friend from the introductions and check-ins group?
Yes, I have some notes and would like to share my screen if Olivia or Emily can enable that. Just let me know when you've done that. Let me know orally when you've done that.
Unfortunately, in the settings, we have disabled that function
Okay.
for friends. So it's not something that I would be able to remedy. It's back on the Zoom website. So I'm sorry for that.
That's okay. I was able to share it within our breakout room, which was I think a help to our group.
Great.
Several ideas, and they came from different size meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We do a stretch after worship and before meeting for business. A few minutes to take care of personal needs, get out of the room, and then come back. A possibility is to do an introduction on the chat. Mm-hmm. Answer an icebreaker question such as, what did you do to prepare for worship? Or what was the major color in your dinner last night? Depending on the numbers, introductions could be oral, mm-hmm. with just a few. More than 12, keep it circumscribed, such as using thumbs up or down to answer particular questions. With a few people in worship in the meeting for business, you can do some wide-ranging and intimate conversation. We know each other already, so there's less need. It's still new, this virtual meeting, so there's tech support to do. Mm-hmm. Our meeting has meeting for business, then worship, and then we've been taken after worship to breaking into random chat rooms with a fairly small group. You never know who you're going to be with, perhaps somebody you haven't seen in a long time who's from another community currently. And maybe I've misinterpreted something somebody from our group said, or somebody has something else to add.
Jay, that was terrific. Thank you. One of the things that I really appreciated about what you just said is that you were making space for meetings of different sizes, because they are going to do this differently. Sarah points out that she finds chat distracting when trying to center and listen well. And that is absolutely a fair response. To me, I make the judgment call based on, is it better to do it by chat, or is it better to not have the opportunity to hear people at all? Because when the group is really big, that tends to be the choice I find myself making. And sometimes it might be better not to hear a check-in from everybody at all. Sometimes that's okay. You could also try doing it in the context of joys and concerns. You could try simply inviting any friends who have a piece of particularly big news to share. You could explicitly say, we're not going to every single person check in, but it would be great to have you share if you really need to. Jay just pasted those notes into chat, which is great. Thank you, Jay. The idea of breaking into small groups after worship or after business is a really good one, because that gives people a chance to socialize. And for a lot of us, that's a need that we have. And I just want to name that some kind of room for sharing, especially of concerns, may be more important now than it would be at other times. Finding some way for people to say if somebody very close to them is ill, if they've had a loss, if they've had a loss of employment, the opportunity to share that kind of thing. This can potentially even go into a prayer list that you would then share with the people who were present after the fact. That's something to check with the community about. And the one other thing that I want to name, which I did not do on this call because almost all of you are by video. There are 2 people here who are phone only. But if you have a mix of video friends and phone-based friends, something that I think is important to do is to find out, first of all, who's on the phone, You can actually ask them by naming the last 4 numbers of their phone number. And then you as clerk or your tech person can change their names so that you can see who they are. And then even if the group is too big for everybody to say their names, I will go through and read everybody's names from my screen, just the names and nothing else, because otherwise the friends who are on the phone have no way of knowing who's in the room. I'm seeing a lot of comments coming up in the chat about the use of chat. And if you are a person who finds chat useful, or if you're having a hard time with following chat at the same time that we're having a conversation, I think that Olivia can save that as we're finishing and make sure you get a copy of those comments. Can we do that, Olivia? Thank you. So that you don't have to keep up with every single thing that's going by right now. You'll get it eventually. Is there a friend who could speak for the presenting items team?
I think we're all waiting for somebody else to do it. And in the interest of time, I will respond, inviting other people to fill it in. We had presentation of items, and some of our things were the same as preparing the agenda, in that we wanted to be very clear on prioritizing the items that were the most important. So we would get recognizing that people grow weary of the screen and have needs. We talked a good bit about stating the agenda items, even though we had already sent them out either by email or however, but knowing that people don't necessarily do their reading, we thought that it would be best to state them again and be clear about them. We wanted to consider screen sharing and having the agenda up there for people to see right then. We wanted to be very clear in our transitions from one point to the next, making sure that folks seemed ready. We wanted to be very clear in the people who were presenting items on the agenda so that they stayed with the point and did not continue too long. Your earlier comments about being clear about the question at hand would be a good guide for that. I think I covered it all, but I'm not sure. Joan or anybody else, if you have something to add, I'd be glad.
Well, my response to Karen and to the rest of that group is that that was great. Thank you. And I'll add 2 things really quickly. One is to affirm what you said about reading the items in the agenda, doing that verbally as you go. It's not only for the sake of people who didn't do their preparation, but also it's an accessibility thing. For friends who are either having trouble hearing or having trouble seeing, giving the information more than once, I think, can be a big help. And then one more thing is just in terms of screen sharing. Screen sharing is an amazing tool used in a way that is limited. So to have the screen share up for like a minute or 2 as you're introducing the item so everybody can see it. But then my recommendation is that you stop sharing the screen before you're going into discernment so that you have the ability to see each other's faces bigger rather than concentrating on the screen share itself. But I think good use of it can be really important. Jean Marie, if you think of it again at the end, remind us to talk again about screen weariness when we get to the end of our time together and we're doing questions. We're actually doing okay for time, not fabulously, but pretty well. And we are more than halfway through our 12 pieces. So you can have your own little celebration for more than halfway through if you'd like. I know that the call gets a little long sometimes. Can we have a friend from the group for naming the sense of the meeting?
So we talked about how it would be important for the clerk up front to let everyone know that they will be looking at all the faces and also looking for sort of some visual apparent signs of approval, whether it's thumbs up or head nodding or like, you know, applause, in addition to people sharing verbally and also using the chat, however the group is doing it. We also talked a little bit about using screen sharing and how sometimes it's helpful for people to have the agenda up, or if there's brainstorming happening around an issue, to have like a scratch pad or whiteboard up, but that does limit how many people the clerk can see or everybody can see. And that just, it shows how important it is to have a tech person to kind of monitor the tech stuff so that the clerk can really pay attention to looking at all of the people that are present at the meeting. We talked about how people who tend to be very verbal in person are probably very verbal, or might be very verbal on Zoom or virtually, and that it's even more important to check in with people who are not as verbal, because there could be various reasons why they're not unmuting, and that to really get a sense of the meeting, it's important to make sure that everybody feels comfortable sharing however they want to share. You know, someone might not be unmuting because they feel like their house is too loud or something, or kids are in the background or something like that. I think those were the main things that we talked about. Yeah, I think that's pretty much that. Those were the big things we talked about.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristen. I liked what you said about articulating up front that you will be searching for visual signals, especially if you are largely a video conference platform. And if you know that's true about yourself as clerk, then that can be a good thing to name. The loss of body language for many, but not all of us, is a pretty significant loss. There's also a difference in terms of just the spiritual sense that you can get when you're in a room with a group of people, as opposed to when you're looking at a group of video screens. At least it's my function. It's my experience that there is a difference there. So some of the ways that I have engaged with that difference, one thing that I do is I'm very careful, and I'm seeing actually Boone is mentioning this on chat right now, that inviting some pauses and leaving deliberate space in between things. In this call, I've been manipulating our pacing to be pretty fast, but as clerk, you can also push the pacing to be slow and steady. You can do both of those things. Another piece is that as clerk, when you're hearing silence, you may not know what that silence means. And I will often, on a call like this one, just say, friends, I don't know what this silence means. Are we confused? Are we tired? Is this an indication that we have reached sense of the meeting? Somebody please articulate this silence for me. That can make a really big deal. Two more things I want to name, and then Dean Shepherd, I am seeing what you said, and I'll speak to it in a second. The other two pieces, one is that it's pretty well shown by evidence that when you're on a Zoom call with some people on video and some on the phone, those who are on the phone are more reluctant to speak. And so just like you would in any other setting, pay particular attention to those who are reluctant, you might take explicit opportunities to invite people on the phone to say something in specific. The other thing that I try hard to do is to pay attention to who are the specialists and have we heard from them? Because it is possible that something is going on in the room that they're in and they've missed something. And so as clerk, if I know that Lance knows a great deal about this thing that we're talking about, but I haven't heard anything from Lance, I might actually ask, Lance, do you have anything to add at this time? I'm noticing about chat that I actually haven't said out loud something that I think is very important. When I am a facilitator for a group that is large like this one, I invite people to use chat and I pay attention to it. When I am clerking and we're in a meeting for worship, except for introductions and farewells, I ask friends not to use the chat. There are some clerks who use the chat as a function during a meeting for business. I ask that we don't, because I think it encourages us to be doing multiple things at the same time and not focusing on the worship that we are having together. And in that vein, D. Murray Shepherd is pointing out the idea of making spiritual space when we're caught up in the discussion. This can happen by video conference and by phone the same way that it can happen when we're in person. We get all worked up about something. And sometimes as clerk, there is the need to just name, you know, I think this is moving too fast. Let's take a breath. And then we'll start again with Alicia, because I see her hand is up. But let's pause first. And I'll give it a minute or two, and then Alicia, please go ahead, giving us that breathing space. Is there a friend from the transitions group? Transitions.
Well, I'll speak, and friends who are in the group, please chime in. We all felt that it really wasn't much different. Transitioning from one agenda item to the other, as long as the agenda was well prepared, sequenced, and communicated or broadcast ahead of time. And like many of the friends mentioned, if this was a lengthy discussion item, before you transition to the next agenda item, a pause or a moment of worship, just like we would do in a conventional setting, we would do that. And we felt that for special occasions, screen sharing was a great tool that we should obviously use in a limited way. But I shared an example in our last business meeting. Our treasurer had to present annual report. Mm-hmm. It's 2 pages worth of numbers. Normally that would be, given as a handout and people would be thumbing through and looking at that. And he did a very effective job of highlighting the areas that needed discussion or special attention, and that worked well. And since I mentioned screen sharing, normally we have it disabled. Again, we all have heard about Zoom bombs and other things. But on special occasions, as the need arises, I think we should embrace this. And other friends that were in the breakout room, please feel free to add to it.
Thank you, friend. Friends, transitions are awesome. They are fantastic opportunities to do cool things as a clerk. 2 different things, in fact. One is if I have a small enough group that I can keep track of who's there, I use transitions as a way to narrate who has appeared and who has disappeared. So when we get to the end of one item and we're about to move to another, I will specifically say, friends, I just want to name that Bruce Haynes has joined us. Or, you know what, friends, it looks like we lost Chris McKenney somewhere in there, and we're going to hope that Chris finds his way back. These kinds of transitions, especially for people on the phone, can be helpful. The other thing I sometimes use transitions to do is to put some words to our collective condition. And you might remember that I actually did that about 20 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago when I said, we're almost halfway through, you can have a little celebration. That was a moment of, I'm noticing people on the screen are kind of starting to go like this a little bit. And I want to name some of this and invite us into a shift in that energy. You can also say, you know what, friends, it looks to me like we are exhausted and we should maybe do one last item and then that's it. Those are the kinds of things that you might be able to do. Let's go ahead and shift to recording clerks. So minutes and recording clerks.
I'll go ahead. Others weigh in, but we noted, as we normally do, getting everything in advance out to the recording clerk, and you mentioned putting it as a Word document, very necessary, really. Being willing to take time, give the recording clerk time to compose and think. Drafting minutes in advance, working with the recording clerk to make sure that that's happening. We had someone who is able to put items up on a screen and has a voice reading feature, which I think is apparently is something you can purchase extra from Zoom. So there are some technological advances that would make the material very accessible, say, to hard of hearing or different people with different needs. We heard in our group varied practices about reading minutes in the face of the meeting. So just to recognize that, some of us do, some of us don't. And those were the points that I took from our group.
Sarah, thank you so much. I think that it is absolutely true that different meetings do different things in terms of reading and approving minutes during or after or before the meeting. We all do it different ways. I have strong opinions about which is best that I'm not going to give right now, because especially in this particular moment, my advice is do it the way you normally do it. This is probably not the moment to make a significant change in the way that you do it. Just a couple other things. One is I make it a point to check with my recording clerk on a regular basis during a meeting like this one. And I will do that verbally so that there's complete transparency. Everybody knows what's going on. Hey, Kristen, are we doing okay? I mean, it's just that simple. And if the recording clerk needs us to hold, we hold for a couple of minutes. And then the last thing is that there are some friends who will put an agenda in a Google Doc, and the clerk and the recording clerk can both see what's happening in the Google Doc with the minutes during the meeting. I personally don't like that. I find it really distracting to try to pay attention to the Google Doc while I'm also trying to get a sense of the meeting. But there are some who really like that feature, so I wanted to name it as something you can experiment with if it's appealing to you. We've got 2 more categories to go, and then we're going to go to open questions. So the second to last piece is ending the meeting. How do you make it be over?
I guess I'll go for our group.
Thanks, Bob.
We spoke mostly about just ending it the way we normally do. Just, just close with, closing worship and pretty much just the normal way.
I think, yeah, normal, Todd, sounds really good to me. The only thing that I specifically try to do differently, okay, actually there are a couple. One is if we heard any significant prayer requests at the beginning of the meeting, if anybody has something significant going on, at the end I will name, we heard from so-and-so about a loss of employment, and let's remember to be holding them in the light. I'll just name those things as clerk at the end so that we have that as our last thing before we go off together. And I try really hard to say a very genuine thank you to friends. And it's not a general thank you, although I'm grateful for friends generally, but I try hard to come up with something specific that I am grateful that the group did that day. Thank you for engaging with something that was difficult. Thank you for experimenting with this new platform. Thank you for keeping a sense of humor as we went through this together today. And how about follow up? What happens after? Oh, I'm gonna read this one because it's awesome. Sarah Keeney reminds us, thank anyone who has been holding the meeting in the light. Anybody who's been holding business in the light. And is there somebody from the follow-up group?
I did most of the talking in the group, so they selected me to share with all of you. I have not had a monthly meeting since this started because we have to have a quorum to make decisions. However, what I usually do after a meeting, business meeting for worship is I talk with the recording clerk about what the recording clerk heard compared to what I heard, so that and then I get to go over the minutes that the recording clerk has before they go to our meeting secretary to be emailed or put out in this week at Willistown. So the follow-up is a brief check-in with the recording clerk, and there's also like you mentioned, thank you, because since we need a specific number of people, I'm very grateful for the people that are present in person before this all started for showing up so we could make decisions. We've not had enough people on Zoom to make decisions, which is a good thing because we haven't had any just major decisions to make. Reports and committee decisions, of course, can be handled within the committee. And Zachary of our group is invisible. He's on the phone. He was walking, and I don't know if he has anything to add. Are you still there, Zachary?
That sounded good. Yeah.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Zachary. I really appreciate that. And the last bit that I'll add, Will, is, and you suggested this possibility, I use the minutes as a clerk's to-do list. So one of the things that I do either before or after I've sent them out to the group is I go through them step by step and write down for myself, you know, this person said they would do such and such. I know from experience they're going to need a reminder. And so I put it on my to-do list to remind them that they said they were going to do that. Or I'll put a reminder to check in on somebody, just going minute by minute. And this is my to-do list as I find my way through the coming month. I don't have to do all of the things on my to-do list. Sometimes I can ask my assistant clerk or somebody else to take on a piece of the work that I can tell needs to be done. Especially if it's something like, you know, will you please check on Angela, just to make sure she's okay. Friends, that was awesome. You actually got through more quickly than I expected. It is 7:31. We have almost reached our goal of having the last 30 minutes for questions. So this is what I'd like to invite you to do. If you have a question that hasn't yet been answered tonight, then I'll invite you to go ahead and put that in the chat. If I don't know the answer, I will welcome other people to give an answer, or if you see a question you're excited about in the chat, you are welcome to answer it in the chat. You are also welcome to put a comment in the chat, which I may or may not read out loud because everybody's going to get this in text form after we're done. And periodically, I'm going to stop and check in directly with people on the phone so that they can verbalize a question or a comment if they have one. So if you have, also if you've already posted a question and you didn't hear the answer, please type it again because I do not know that. There's too much to keep track of. What advice do you have for large business meetings, 50 plus, where not everybody fits on a screen? Yeah. If you have more than 25 people, you are not all going to fit on a screen. That's generally the magic number. I can name a couple of things that I would suggest. One is you can have a sort of a assistant or deputy who can be watching some of the friends and can be going back and forth and paying attention to who looks like they're trying to speak. You can also use the raise hand electronic function, which is under the participants button. So those are a couple of ways to do it. If there's anybody who you have yourself clerked a meeting of more than 50 people, I'm going to lower the bar. You have clerked a meeting of more than 30 people on Zoom, and you have a specific suggestion to make, I welcome that now. Go ahead and unmute yourself and make that suggestion.
I learned from another colleague to, instead of, we have hand for raising a hand, but also use some other signal, like he was using X for hand and Z for I have something to say right now about what somebody is saying right now, as opposed to wanting to be in the queue. We found that very helpful.
Jenny, thank you. That's a really helpful delineation. I can wait a little while as opposed to if I don't say my thing now, it will not be relevant in 3 or 4 minutes. Thanks for that. Anybody else have specific experience with very large groups and you'd like to give a tip?
So I'm a clerk in training at a school, a friend's school. And this past week, what I did was I was the co-host. And so I was admitting everyone from the waiting room. I had the agenda ahead of time. And what I did was privately message the clerk to let him know that one of the people who was supposed to present early on was not yet on the Zoom call, and then messaged him again once that person joined.
Thank you, Celeste. That's a really, really good tip for very large groups. Having somebody else paying attention to, are all the people who are on the agenda actually here? The clerk can often rearrange that spontaneously. Benjamin Waterhouse names that there's a way to see up to 49 people at once. My understanding is that depends on your processing power in your computer. Some people can do it and some people cannot. Do you encourage clerk support meetings that encompass several meetings? Oh, absolutely yes. If you're just asking, do I personally encourage that? The answer is I absolutely do. I am a big fan of anybody having support from other people doing similar work to theirs. So clerks talking to other clerks, recording clerks talking to other recording clerks. And there are a few ways to do that. One is to, if you just know the people, initiate it. Nobody needs to give you permission. If you don't know people and you want to find somebody else who's doing similar work to yours so you can talk with each other, think about reaching out to whoever your yearly meeting staff or clerk might be. Or the other option is tap into some of the social media networks. Find yourself an FGC page or Quaker Communications and Outreach or something along those lines, and just say, hey, is anybody else a clerk? And I would love to have somebody to talk with. If you're a person who has a clerk support group, several clerks who talk together, and you would like to put in the chat, how did you put that together? I think that might be a welcome comment if anybody has something like that. One more question, and then I'm going to invite people on the phone. How do friends include members who refuse to join a Zoom meeting for worship for business? It's a really good question. I think I want to answer the actual question first, and then I'm going to say something in addition to that. Including members who don't join a Zoom meeting for worship for business. There are some ways you can invite that friend to offer some sort of comments before the meeting, either by phone or by email to you as clerk. I know that my yearly meeting has been doing some of that. What's important if you do offer that option is that the friend knows that what you're offering is the opportunity for them to be heard. You are not offering a guarantee that the meeting will come to a sense of the meeting in alignment with what they said. So, you know, friend, we will read what you said, but that is as much as I can guarantee is going to happen based on this form of input. Some friends may be willing to join by phone, even if they're not willing or able to join by video conference. So that's an additional option. And in a second, I'll give some space for you to offer suggestions to one another, especially in chat. But if you need to verbalize something, I'll give that invitation. But another piece that I want to name is that it is very likely there will be people who are left out. This makes us sad, but I want to name that the fact that some people are left out has never before stopped us from having a meeting for worship with a concern for business. There are many people who are often left out when we are meeting in person. Sometimes it's for accessibility reasons. Sometimes it's because somebody has a job that requires them to work at that time. Sometimes it's because of childcare or elder care. So just when we know some people are being left out, let's not forget that that is always true. It's just that now it's probably different people. Is there anybody who has a suggestion about including people who don't engage with Zoom? If you'd like to offer that, go ahead and unmute yourself and offer those suggestions.
Yes, Peggy Ramsey, Old Haverford Friends meeting. You could invite them to a Zoom person's house and share the screen and work out how you're going to unmute for them and unmute for yourself. It's also a chance for you to have a social time with them at Rise Up Meeting.
Peggy, thank you, first of all, for identifying yourself by name when you spoke. That's a really helpful practice. And some of us are in places where that can work right now, and some of us are not. So I just want to name that you know, based on where you are, whether the invitation to go to somebody's house is a step that you want to take right now. It's not the same for all of us.
This is Prudence Haynes from Providence Meeting. I think it's really important to be willing to write a note or pick up the phone, as well as use the current technologies. Sometimes people need a moment to reflect before they respond. And if they receive a note inviting a conversation, they can do that. Or if they receive a phone call and they have a moment to say, gee, this is a great idea, but could we do it another time? They can pause. They can put the pause, but they can hit the pause button themselves, reflect, and then respond.
Thank you, Prudence. Is there maybe one more person with a suggestion?
This is
May I
Doreen
add
from.
something?
Oops.
Let's go to Doreen first, and then whoever that other voice was right after that.
So I've been recording clerk for a bunch of different Quaker things, and I'm a little bit of a show your work recording clerk because sometimes the decision is important or sometimes some aspect of the process is important to write down. But if you're a show your work recording clerk, people who don't want to deal with the Zoom issues can think about it. And sometimes, especially depends if something is complicated, it takes time to work out anyway. And so there can be follow-up or talking to people. The clerk or somebody from the committee presenting can talk to people between business meetings or figure out if there's questions. It depends a little bit on the situation and the individuals.
Thank you, Doreen. And I did hear one other person start to speak, and I want to invite that, and then I'm going to ask us to move on.
This is Zachary. Just simply a technique that has come up in other meetings is that folks can be, and I've seen it happen and it does work, where you can, someone can call and you can put them on speaker and facilitate them joining the Zoom by via audio through your video connection also.
Thanks, Zachary. And we do have more questions in the chat, but I'm going to take an explicit pause right now and ask whether there's anyone on the phone who has a question or a comment who isn't able to access the chat. If there's someone who's on the phone, please feel free to speak up at this time. I will offer that opportunity at least one more time before we're done for the night. People with a cell phone seem to have a different screen that they're looking at compared to the laptop. This is from Janet Lamborn. That is very true. Laptops, iPads, and cell phones all have different views in Zoom. You're not looking at the same things in the same places. So when you're giving the technology talk and you're saying something like how to mute or unmute, it's less helpful to say, look in the left-hand corner. It's more helpful to say, somewhere on your screen, there is a picture of a microphone. On my screen, it's in the lower left-hand corner, but it might be somewhere else on yours. So if you describe the icon or tell people what word they're looking for, that's a lot more useful than telling them where the icon is. And that's one of those things that you wouldn't know because you're looking at the only screen you're looking at. So how do you know? Yes, I want to affirm a comment that Barb made, that sometimes there's a situation where somebody declines to join a Zoom call, and sometimes there's a situation where somebody can't. And I think that those are both important things to remember. I am pausing because I'm scanning down in the chat. I think somebody in the room is going to know the answer to this, but I don't know exactly what we're talking about. Sarah Keeney says, I'm curious about the hybrid model mentioned that FGC has used. Is somebody from FGC here who knows what the phrase hybrid model means?
Yes, I think what she's talking about, and let me know if it's not, this is Jean Marie Barch, is that often we will have a few people who will Zoom into a meeting while the majority of the folks are in one room together. Am I understanding what you mean, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. And it works moderately well. Part of the difficulty in that model is that until we got a device that allows the camera to scan the room, people who were on Zoom were not able to see anything except a small slice of the room. And that technology is very, very useful in creating a sense of inclusion. I think we also have found that it's much harder when the majority of the folks are together for one person or two people to feel as though they're connected to the meeting. It's very different when everybody is on Zoom. And I have the presiding clerk behind me. Do you want to add something to that?
Hello, Frank.
Hi, thanks for this lovely presentation. No, Jean Marie has said it all.
I appreciate that. And just want to add that I've also had the experience of that hybrid model. And the one tip that I have is to have a Zoom babysitter or somebody who's dedicated to sitting next to the computer and paying attention to the people on Zoom who may try to say something 6 times, but nobody notices. That can be a really helpful thing. The one other question that I'm seeing here is, do you recommend recording the meeting? So again, if you is directed to me, I actually don't recommend recording a meeting for worship with a concern for business. The reason I don't recommend it is because in my experience, it makes people more hesitant to go to tender places. However, you are the clerk of your meeting. You know your people. You know whether it's a good idea or not to ask them this question. And you know if there might be a good reason to try recording in your meeting. So if you're feeling strongly led that this is something you should talk about, by all means, bring it up with your meeting. The only thing I'll say is categorically not to record with people not knowing you're recording. It needs to be very clear that that's happening, and it needs to be very clear where you're going to put it and what you're going to do with it after the fact. So as long as everybody knows that and is okay, then that's a different thing. There's some conversation happening in the chat about where does the file go after it's recorded? And I'll just say that I think the question is being answered really well by other people in the chat. So I invite you to look at that after this is done when you get that in your email inbox. I want to pause again and invite friends on the phone if there's something that you need to add or ask at this time. And there might be one more question worth of time. If somebody out there is sitting on a question and you're just dying to ask, now is your moment.
So sometimes, I guess my question is to other friends, sometimes people like haven't fully read something, but it can be really useful to just have someone read the relevant paragraph of minutes or of some kind of a document. I guess I'm curious whether other people have that same experience, because it sometimes helps return focus, particularly if people don't have the document in front of them or, you know, they're on the phone or something.
let's try this strategy. And Doreen, I'll narrate for people on the phone. If that is an experience you've had, that it's a good idea to read a little piece of something out loud, how about you just wave your arm back and forth if that's something that you've done as a clerk? I know that I have. All right, so I'm seeing that maybe half or a little bit less than half of people on the call are waving. For some reason, more people on screen 1 than on screen 2 and screen 3. So apparently all the read alouders happen to be on screen 1. I have no explanation for this. Friends, I am very grateful for your time tonight. You are either very tired or extremely efficient, or possibly both, because we actually have run out of questions and comments before our time is completely up. I'm going to turn this back to Olivia in a minute, but I just want to name before I do that. I have a fair amount of additional resources on virtual clerking. It's a lot of the same kinds of stuff we've talked about tonight, but in other formats. There is a, or we're moving into the double-digit hours of Zoom today. Yes, Melissa, some of us are. And that is a long, long day. So the first time that I ever worked on this, it was in the form of a blog post. And then I also did it in video form not very long ago for a YouTube video in conversation with the former presiding clerk of New England yearly meeting. And so you can see it in conversation form and hear his reflections on clerking in addition to mine. It's the two of us talking back and forth with one another. All of those things and a number of other things are available on my website, which I'm putting into the chat now. And the other thing that I just want to mention is that, among other things that I do through the website, I send a weekly update. Every Wednesday, there's a message that goes out in connection with something that either I'm working on or that I've seen happening among friends. And so that's an option as well. And you can find the sign up pretty easily there if that's something that you want to do. Friends, thank you very much for using the chat creatively tonight. A lot of you were doing that in really powerful ways. And thank you for your patience in the moments of chaos we had before we went into our breakout rooms. Also, I appreciate the reflections you gave us, because those reflections that you brought back, there were a number of new ideas in that. So I got to learn tonight too, and I appreciate that. Olivia.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm super grateful for our time together. I'm grateful for the engagement, your patience as we all learn through this, and the suggestions and the support for one another that, that you continue to show for each other. We've had other clerks calls that have been supportive, and we've shared wonderful ideas. We've had different focuses each week. And I think this time together has been really wonderful as we just move through these unknown and unsettled times. This call has been recorded, as I talked about in the emails. So we will post this to our on our website. I will also send this out in a follow-up email that will have some notes of our conversations, helpful notes of our conversations, and include Emily's resources. And Emily asked me to include the article that was just published by PYM today. So with all that said, I want to say thank you again. And I'd like to close with a little bit of worship together. Friends, be well and be safe.